everybody be checking in. That's y'all favorite thing to do, check in with somebody that's gonna rob your stupid.
Yeah, he reached out. He was getting extorted by some Crips.
I think Paul Rosenberg was,
Or
or
Eminem was getting extorted by some Crips.
Where we go, people know we roll deep as 40, 50 Samoans, ain't no one when Debo was.
That Boo-Yaa song did what it was supposed to do. Like, hey, you stay away from this homeboy.
If you look at Eminem, you probably wouldn't think he's the type to get caught up in anything beyond his bars and savage disses. But the day some Crips tried to force him to check in was the day they realized he doesn't mess around.
So Eminem, 50, everybody outside, like the cigar. I was bugging because I seen, this is when I knew Eminem was real. He's like, I don't give a man.
Now, if you don't know what checking in means, here's the deal. When rappers, celebs, or high-profile figures roll into cities with heavy gang presence, especially places like LA, local gangs sometimes expect them to check in.
You better check in. Magic, nigga. I ain't say I'm gangster, nigga. Crip. Straight up, nigga. Crip, nigga. Straight up.
On the surface, it's framed as a sign of respect, like, yo, I know I'm in your territory, let's keep things cool. But let's be real, most of the time, it's just a slick way to shake people down for money, free features, or business deals that only benefit the gang. And if someone refuses, well, there are consequences.
I mean, everybody be checking in. That's y'all favorite thing to do, check in with somebody that's gonna rob your stupid.
Some artists just go along with it to avoid problems, treating it like paying for protection so they can move freely. But Eminem, yeah, he wasn't about that life. Let's dive in. In the rap game, Eminem isn't exactly the first name that comes to mind when you think of a hardcore gangster rapper. He's not out here flashing gang signs or repping a set, and he never built his career off that street image. But here's the thing. When it comes to standing his ground, M has proven time and time again that he's got more backbone than a lot of so-called street rappers. Every time someone has tried to press him, check him, or intimidate him, he never backed down. In fact, he's usually been the first to step up and handle the situation head on. That's why when the Crips decided they wanted him to check in, instead of him backing down or trying to negotiate his way out of it, M knew he had a serious ace up his sleeve. The Boo-Yaa tribe.
That Boo-Yaa song did what it was supposed to do. Like, hey, you stay away from this. He's our homeboy.
If you don't know about the Boo-Yaa tribe, they weren't just another rap group. They were deeply connected to the Samoan gangs in LA. And if you know anything about gang culture, then you know the Sons of Samoa and other Samoan sets are not to be messed with. They might seem chill and easygoing, but when it comes to protecting their own, things can get serious real quick.
They some big dudes, they some big Owens, you know what I'm saying, who got heart, you know? So, I mean, you know, if you get into it with them, you know, you better be prepared to get into it with them. You know, one of the homies, one of they folk, that be prepared to get into it with them.
And these were the guys who had Eminem's back. Monster Ganja, the nephew of one of the Boo-Yaa members, later confirmed in an interview that his uncles and their crew were basically Eminem's unofficial security while he was in LA, making sure nobody tried to test him. In return, M showed major love by hopping on their track Hip Hop Is in a state of 911 alongside Be Real. According to reports, Eminem's manager Paul Rosenberg even reached out to Boo-Yaa when M was getting extorted by some Crips. And they weren't about to let that happen. They stepped in and shut it down.
If I'm not mistaken, they actually helped Eminem in a situation where the Crips were, I guess, were shaking him down and whatnot. They kind of helped him and his manager out.
You can even hear Eminem shouting them out in his lyrics. Everywhere we go, people know we roll deep 40. 50 Samoans, they know him when Debo was 50.
Where we go, people know we roll deep as 40, 50 Samoans, ain't no one when Debo was.
That might also explain why M never seemed scared of Suge Knight, even though Suge had a rep as one of the most feared figures in the industry. One of the Boo-Yaa members even claimed that Suge himself didn't want problems with them.
Suge Knight scared of you. Suge Knight scared of you. And then everyone I talked to, man, is Suge really this, really that? I was like,
but when
I'm Samoan, man.
Now, the whole Eminem versus Suge Knight's situation doesn't get talked about as much as you'd expect, but it's one of those wild industry stories. It all ties back to Dr. Dre leaving Death Row Records. When Dre signed Eminem and later brought 50 Cent into the mix, Suge already had beef with Dre, so when M and 50 started blowing up, they basically inherited that beef.
And M had inherited Dr. Dre's beef by signing with Dre. M was now the prodigy of Dr. Dre.
And Suge, being Suge, wasn't about to let it slide. He tried pressing them multiple times, like that one infamous moment when 50 Cent was filming in Da Club. Out of nowhere, someone yelled, "Suge Knight is here." And the whole set went into panic mode. Suge rolled up deep, reportedly with about 30 members of a Mexican gang, just to flex his influence. That was Suge's style. Show up unannounced, intimidate, and remind people who he was.
So Suge came, he had some Mexican niggas. Now we from New York. You ain't never seen a tattoo on his forehead. 118th Street crew. I'm like, tattoo on his face. Mexican niggas, 18th Street. Suge just got the cigar. He just like that. He's like a pressure guy. That's why he got into the shit he got into lately, because he like a pull up, light a cigar, and you see tattoos on their face, but we like, damn, what we got to lose?
But amidst all that chaos, Eminem stood his ground just like he always did.
So Eminem, 50, everybody outside, cigar. I was bugging because I seen, this is when I knew Eminem was real. He's like, I don't give a man. This is when I knew, I'm like, damn, Eminem is a real.
Then there's the wild story from the 1999 Source Awards, where things could have gone left real fast. Eminem was there performing with D12, and like any big award show, the atmosphere was already on edge.
Faces, but nothing compares to these blue and yellow purple hills. I climbed the highest mountain.
Normally, artists could have their bodyguards close by, but for some reason, the rules that night forced security to sit separately, leaving M in a vulnerable spot. And you already know Suge Knight and his crew wasted no time taking advantage of that. According to Eminem's former bodyguard, Big Nas, things got sketchy real quick. Out of nowhere, M found himself surrounded by a group of intimidating guys all rocking red shirts, a not so subtle sign that they were affiliated with the Bloods, the gang Suge was heavily connected to.
Approached M at the 1999 Source Awards. The way they had it set up, the bodyguards could not sit with their artists. You had to stand off to the side. The prodigy of Dr. Dre. Dre left Death Row. Suge didn't like that. Dre getting back on. Got this white rapper that's ended up being the best rapper, and was cut off on his way to his seat. And all these guys in red shirts surrounded him.
Out of a mob movie. According to Big Nas, there was serious intel that Suge had plans to harm Eminem during what was supposed to be a laid-back getaway. But this wasn't just some vague, behind-the-scenes threat. Suge allegedly sent more than 50 of his guys all the way from LA to Hawaii with one mission: disrupt the trip and put pressure on M. What was supposed to be a chill vacation with Eminem, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and their families turned into a full-on security crisis. The moment they landed, the whole vibe shifted. Forget sunbathing and tropical drinks. Suddenly, they were in full survival mode. Bulletproof vests became part of the daily wardrobe, and firearms were kept close at all times just in case.
So Suge sent the tribe to Hawaii.
The situation got so tense that the Honolulu Police Department had to step in, assigning officers to shadow Eminem and the rest of the crew for protection. So Big Nas later looked back on the whole situation and couldn't help but describe just how absolutely surreal and out of control everything felt at that moment. Because let's be real, nobody thought it was going to go down like that. It was supposed to be a vacation, just a chill trip, maybe a little work mixed with some relaxation. But instead, it turned into one gigantic headache that nobody was prepared for. Imagine this. They had their wives with them, Some people had even brought their kids along, thinking it was all just gonna be smooth sailing. But the second they stepped off that plane, all hell broke loose. Total chaos. Honolulu police were already on the scene, ready to jump into action. And before anyone even had time to take a breath, they were being hurried along, rushed into a transport van with everyone. Kids, wives, the whole crew. Because things were already heating up fast. But here's the thing, even with all that tension, all the drama, and all the uncertainty in the air, one fact was absolutely undeniable. If Suge Knight had ever seriously tried to make a move on Eminem, things wouldn't have ended well for him. And that's not just speculation, that's a cold, hard fact. Why? Because Eminem wasn't rolling solo, and he definitely wasn't defenseless. No, he had some serious muscle backing him up. And we're not talking about your average bodyguards. We're talking about the Samoan gangs. And if there's one thing Suge knew, it was that you don't mess with the Sons of Samoa unless you're ready to deal with consequences that go way beyond just a regular street fight.
They some big dudes, they some big Owen, you know what I'm saying, who got heart, you know? So, I mean, you know, if you get into it with them, you know, you better be prepared to get into it with them. You know, one of the they folk, that be prepared to get into it with them.
See, Suge might have had power, connections, and a reputation that made a lot of people shake in their boots, but even he wasn't reckless enough to poke the bear when it came to these guys. The Sons of Samoa weren't just some random gang. They were one of the most feared, most respected, and most dominant forces out there. They originally formed in Long Beach, California back in the mid-1980s, but their influence spread fast, reaching all across California and into Hawaii, where they only grew stronger and more established. By the time the 90s rolled around, they had already built up a solid presence in key cities like San Jose, Oakland, and Hayward, places where members of a Samoan family who were deeply tied to the gang also happened to live. And if you ask law enforcement, especially those in Washington state who had been tracking these guys for years, the reports were never pretty. The SOS gang had a reputation for being brutal, strategic, and absolutely ruthless when it came to making sure they got what they wanted. Intimidation was their bread and butter, and extortion wasn't just something they did. It was a method of control, a way to establish dominance, and they weren't afraid to take things as far as they needed to in order to prove a point. If there was beef, if there was any kind of dispute, you could bet they weren't the type to sit down and talk things out. They handled things in the most direct way possible, and that usually meant violence.
Did you catch this? 100%. Samoan. Lift up your shirt, bro. Lift up your shirt. Lift up your shirt. Show your tat. Look at that. Samoan.
I won't hesitate to shoot anyone.
You won't?
No, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot anyone if they come and mess with me.
And if you really wanted to push your luck, well, you'd be dealing with not just one guy, but a whole force that was more than ready to throw down at a moment's notice. Now, when it came to street rivalries, SOS had their fair share of enemies, but none more intense than the Tongan Crips. And let's just say that the tension between them wasn't something that ever really cooled down. It was the kind of street war that never needed much of a reason to reignite. And if you were caught in the middle of it, you were in for a world of trouble. And just in case you ever found yourself in certain neighborhoods and weren't sure who you were dealing with, SOS made sure you knew exactly who they were. They had their own set of symbols, and one of the most well-known was the Seattle Mariners logo, which they proudly sported on hats, jackets, and other clothing.
Oftentimes you will see members sporting the Seattle Mariners hat as well.
But it wasn't just about the gear. They also had distinct hand signals that let everyone around them know exactly where they stood. And in gang-heavy areas, those signs weren't just for show. Every gesture, every symbol, every little detail carried weight, and you had to be careful because one wrong move could mean big trouble. At the end of the day, the Sons of Samoa weren't just about making noise, they were about making sure people knew exactly who they were dealing with. They didn't go looking for trouble, but if it found them, they weren't the type to back down. Their presence alone was enough to keep most people in check, and those who didn't take them seriously usually learned the hard way. So when it came to Suge and whatever plans he might have had, it's safe to say he understood the risks. Going after Eminem wasn't just about dealing with bodyguards or security. It meant stepping into territory that could turn into something way bigger than just rap beef. And for a guy like Suge, who built his empire on power moves, even he knew when a line wasn't worth crossing. To put that into perspective, back in 2000, the entire Samoan population in Oakland was just 614 people. That's only about 0.15% of the city's population. When you're that much of a minority in a tough environment, sticking together isn't just about loyalty, it's about survival. That's why SOS wasn't just a gang. For many, it was a brotherhood.
Even though we're low in numbers, we don't let nobody push us around.
We thank you for this opportunity, for allowing me and my brothers to come here.
A friend of the Samoan family even described the group in court records, explaining how SOS had a strong presence in places like San Jose, and interestingly, even within Samoan churches. These were the same places where members of the gang would talk about values like respecting elders and taking care of their own. Principles deeply rooted in Samoan culture, but the moment they stepped outside those church walls, it was a whole different story. The same guys who preached about respect and community would become some of the most ruthless figures on the streets. And here's the thing, not everyone saw SOS purely as a criminal gang. For some Samoans, especially those living in the Bay Area, the gang felt more like a social club than an organized crime syndicate. It wasn't just about making money or fighting rivals, it was about creating a sense of belonging in a world where they often felt overlooked. They weren't always about crime. Sometimes it was simply about having each other's backs in a hostile environment. But don't get it twisted. Just because they had a different approach didn't mean they weren't dangerous. In fact, their adaptability made them even more unpredictable. Unlike the Bloods and Crips in LA, who were locked into endless color wars, SOS in the Bay Area played by their own rules. They weren't concerned with a traditional red versus blue battle, they focused on their own alliances, survival, and keeping control over their territory.
What does that mean? Gathering the brothers. One of the things with the foe is what we want to advocate, the colors. We want to leave the colors on.
You want to leave the colors
alone.
Gotcha.
And that flexibility made them even deadlier. Take what happened in Monterey, California, for example. Federal prosecutors revealed that a subset of SOS had teamed up with a local Norteño crew called the Eminem Squad, forming an alliance that went beyond simple gang politics. These guys weren't just running the usual street hustles. They were taking things to a whole new level, targeting rival Sureño members in ways that went far beyond typical gang beef. In 2017, SOS and the Eminem Squad were reported to have worked together on planned executions of their enemies. This wasn't some random street fight. These guys were organizing hits. One case detailed how they carried out drive-by shootings, with reports showing they fired multiple rounds into a Hayward home where Sureño members were staying. It wasn't just about sending a message. They were trying to eliminate their rivals completely. And when it came to robbing people, SOS had their own brutal way of doing things. Instead of relying on guns every time, they were known for their infamous one-hitter-quitter method. Basically, they'd roll up on someone, deliver a knockout punch, and before the victim even knew what hit them, they'd be stripped of everything. Wallet, jacket, shoes, whatever SOS wanted, they took. And the wildest part? Most of the time, their victims wouldn't even remember what happened until they woke up bruised and robbed, with SOS already long gone. Out of all the violent incidents connected to SOS, one of the most chilling was the tragic death of 25-year-old Nolan, a young man who was just hours away from one of the happiest days of his life. On May 17, 1996, Nolan was getting ready to marry his fiancée, Rowena Pinello. The wedding was set to take place in Daly City, near San Francisco, and he had been heavily involved in planning every last detail. That night, after spending time at his parents' house in Hayward, he had a few last-minute errands to run. He had to pick up tuxedos for himself and his groomsmen, book a hotel room for after the wedding, and help his aunt with some final preparations. But Nolan never made it to his wedding day. Instead of waking up to a celebration surrounded by loved ones, his life was cut short in a brutal act of violence, a horrifying reminder of just how ruthless the streets could be. That night, as Nolan stepped out of his car in Hayward, he had no idea that just a few seconds could mean the difference between life and death. But fate can be cruel like that. If he had been even 2 minutes faster or slower, if he had parked in a slightly different spot, if he had left just a little earlier or later, he might have gone completely unnoticed. Instead, he caught the attention of a group of men driving by in a stolen van. And in that split second, his fate was sealed. These weren't just random criminals looking for quick cash. They were predators hunting for the next victim, and Nolan, completely unaware, had just become their target. Without hesitation, they moved in fast. Nolan was cornered, held at gunpoint, and forced into the van before he even had a chance to react. What should have been just another night of last-minute wedding errands instantly turned into a nightmare as his captors stripped him of everything he had. His wallet, his watch, his dignity. But the robbery wasn't enough. Instead of just taking his things and letting him go, the situation took an even darker turn. As they drove around the Bay Area with Nolan trapped in the van, the men began arguing amongst themselves. Not about what to do next, not about how to escape, but about something far more sinister. They were debating who would be the one to K-word him. Nolan, terrified and pleading for his life, tried everything he could to reason with them, to convince them to let him go, to remind them that he was just hours away from getting married, that he had a future waiting for him, people who loved him, a fiancé who was expecting him at the altar in the morning. But these men didn't care. Their decision was cold, merciless, and final. Without hesitation, they shot him once in the chest with a sawed-off shotgun, dumping his body in the middle of a dark, empty street in Hayward before speeding off into the night as if nothing had happened. Just after midnight, Nolan's lifeless body was found, lying alone in the street. It should have been the happiest day of his life, but instead it became a day of unimaginable grief. The news sent shockwaves through the community, devastating his family, friends, and most of all, his fiancée, Rowena, who received the horrifying call just 30 minutes before their wedding was set to begin. Instead of exchanging vows, she was mourning the senseless, brutal MDR of the man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with. But if there was anything even more tragic than the crime itself, it was just how reckless and sloppy the Kayers had been. They left clues everywhere, holding on to easily identifiable stolen items, keeping bloodstained clothing, and making zero effort to cover their tracks. It didn't take long for detectives to piece it all together, and within just 10 days, 4 suspects were arrested. The group included 2 juveniles, an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old, the one believed to be the actual shooter. And as it turned out, 3 of them were members of the Sons of Samoa gang. When the case went to trial, 2 of the suspects decided to cut a deal, turning informant in exchange for 16-year prison sentences. The other 2, including the shooter, refused to cooperate, and they paid the price, receiving life sentences that keep them locked up to this day. But even as the case was closed and justice was served, the MDR left behind a lasting scar, not just for Nolan's loved ones, but for the community that had to come to terms with just how brutal gang violence could be. And yet, despite their reputation for violence, the story of the Sons of Samoa isn't as black and white as it might seem. Over the years, stories have surfaced that paint a more complicated picture of the gang. Stories of moments when they actually stepped up to help people in need, even those who weren't connected to them. Whether it was about protecting their own, standing up for other marginalized communities, or simply following their own unique code of loyalty, SOS wasn't always the ruthless, remorseless force people imagined them to be.
Something that like what we was representing, you wanted your hood to be that hood. You wanted to be about it, and everything that you did was about it, representing it.
At the end of it all, if there's one name that has been linked to their protection, it's Eminem. Yes, Marshall Mathers himself. From what we now know, at a time when his life could have been in serious danger, Eminem was one of the few individuals who actually benefited from their support.